Hello, fine students. Welcome to a lecture on communication principles and truths. These principles and truths are going to serve as a foundation from which we draw all of the other information we'll learn over the course of this term. And in fact, you'll hear me refer back to these principles and truths quite frequently. So you're going to need to know these well for all of our exams in the class. So I hope that you will be taking notes while you're listening and jotting down as much as you can that will help you to recall, remember, and fully understand what we're talking about here today. So there are 10 principles or truths. We're going to cover 9 of them in great detail, and one we'll cover at another time. So let's get started. The first principle and truth is that communication can be intentional or unintentional. Bottom line is you cannot not communicate. This is the fun phrase we like to use in communication to help people to remember that even if you're not trying to, people are getting meaning from what you're doing. So you may even be asleep and people are getting meaning from you. So if you ever watch a sitcom, a lot of times one person on that sitcom will hear somebody else in the sitcom talk in their sleep. And then the rest of the story is about them trying to figure out what they meant when they were talking in their sleep. Well, that poor person who was asleep was unconscious, didn't even know they were communicating, and yet that other person got all kinds of meaning from what they did while they were unconscious. So intentional means we're being purposeful, we're doing something on purpose. Unintentional means we're not doing it on purpose. The bottom line, however, is whether we're being intentional or unintentional, both are powerful. People are getting meaning from both of those types of communication. And so our goal in this class is to increase our intentional communication and decrease our unintentional communication. Knowing that we can never fully get rid of the unintentional because we're only half of the communication story. The other person we're communicating with is responsible for some of the communication as well, which means we can't stop them from getting meaning from our behavior just because we don't want them to. But what we can do is we can work on our own awareness. We can work on what are things I'm saying or doing that I'm not aware of so that we can learn to control those behaviors a little bit better. So for example, I apparently have been cursed with what is now known as resting bitch face. I didn't know this for the first 25 years of my life. I just had a series of weird interactions with people where they'd say things to me like, "What's wrong?" And I'd be like, "Nothing, I'm fine." And they're like, "Really? You look upset." And I'm like, "No." And I never put it together until I was about 25. And I finally went to my friends and said, "Hey, people say and do weird things to me sometimes. Can you help me understand?" And my friends helped me to realize that when I'm not smiling, I look quite angry. Now, while I can't change my face without some extreme measures like plastic surgery, what I can do is be aware of what my face sends how my face sends messages to other people. And for example, when I meet new people for the first time, I try to be extra warm and try to smile more than is natural for me until they feel more at ease and they understand that I'm not angry. That's just what my face looks like. So a lot of this class is about building that self-awareness so that we can become more intentional communicators while still appreciating it. We can never get rid of the unintentional. We cannot not communicate. We are sending messages as long as other people have an awareness of us. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to move on to principle number 2. Meanings are in people, not in words or symbols. So let's start by making sure we understand what words and symbols are. So a symbol is one thing that represents another thing. So all of our words are symbols, but not all of symbols are words. So for example, the word for this item is pen. P-E-N is the symbol we use to represent this writing instrument. So when I say pen, you know what I'm talking about. Now, first of all, why is it called a pen? We really don't know. Bottom line is a couple people were sitting around one day, they made a sound, that sound sounded good to them, and they said, let's identify this item by that sound. That's where language came from, and then language evolved from one group of people to another group of people. So a pen, saying pen, P-E-N, that's a symbol. So all words are symbols because P-E-N represents the item. But not all symbols are words. So for example, when I smile, my smile is also a symbol. My smile symbolizes most classically happiness. But why does it symbolize it? Because happiness doesn't live in my lips and my teeth. Happiness lives in my brain or my heart, my soul, depending on your belief system. And my lips and my teeth are representing that happiness to you. So that's what makes my nonverbal behavior symbolic as well. So again, all words are symbols, not all symbols are words. So let's go back to the principle at large. Meanings are in people, not in words. Humans decide what these symbols mean. Humans decide how these symbols change over time. So I'd like to talk about the evolution of the word bitch. So the word bitch was originally coined to describe female dogs, as we all know. But over time, somebody discovered that this was a word that could be used to describe primarily women, not always, but who somebody didn't think was behaving very nicely. Then the word was used to describe often men, but not always, who somebody didn't think was behaving strongly or toughly or manly enough. And even more recently, as I walk around the hallways of RCC, I often see a couple of female students, usually, not always, but usually female, walking through the hallways, and one of them, and they're laughing and they're having a good time talking, and one of them will elbow the other one and say, "Shut up, bitch." And the friend giggles and laughs and they walk on their way. Well, whether we're talking about a female dog, a person not behaving nicely, or a person not behaving strongly enough, none of those are very nice. So why does that young lady giggle when her friend says, "Shut up, bitch"? Because in that relationship, for those two young women at that moment, at that time, saying "shut up, bitch" is the equivalent of saying, "Oh, buddy, you're being so silly." And they both know that's what it means. Now, if I walked up to those same two young women at the same time and said, "Shut up, bitch," they probably wouldn't giggle, laugh, and elbow me. They'd probably be taken aback and be upset. Because coming out of my mouth, the meaning is going to have a very different meaning. Likewise, let's say those same two young ladies get in an argument later in that same afternoon and one of them says, "Shut up, bitch." It's most likely the other one's going to get upset now. They're not going to think it means, "Oh, buddy, you're so silly." They're going to think "shut up, bitch" means "I'm angry with you and you need to stop talking." So humans decide the meaning, and so the message for you is not to assume that the meaning you're applying to certain symbols is the same meaning somebody else is applying. Within our own families, we can have wildly different meanings for the same symbols, and that's something we need to start exploring to be more effective. All right, so that brings us to principle number 3. Principle number 3 is that communication is unrepeatable. So we can repeat words, we can repeat symbols, but they don't ever carry the same meaning. So for example, my son's now in his early 20s, but let's go back to when he's 8 years old. If I walk in his room and say, "Hey sweetie, can you please take out the trash?" He would say, "Yeah, sure," because he was an agreeable kid. And often 20 minutes later, the trash still wouldn't be taken out. So I'd go back in his room and I'd say, "Hey, could you please take out the trash?" And he'd go, "Oh, yeah, I'll get it." And sometimes, not very often, I'd have to go in his room 20 minutes later and say, "Hey, take out the trash." And he'd go, "All right, I'm doing it right now." Now, it seems like we're repeating communication because it's the same two people, it's the same topic, and we're mostly using the same words. But the meaning changes a little bit every time for both of us. So the first time I go in his room, there's not much more going on in my head than what I say. "Hey, could you please take out the trash?" That's the meaning I'm conveying. And when he says yes, he probably meant it because he was an agreeable kind of guy. But knowing my son, he got busy reading a book or playing a video game or doing his homework and forgot to take out the trash. So when I come in the second time, you can hear the doubt in my voice. "Hey, could you please take out the trash?" Where I'm starting to wonder, did he defy me or did he just forget? I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he forgot and ask nicely again. That second time that I ask him and he goes, "Oh, yeah," he's communicating that he forgot, that he'll get to it. But what he also might be thinking is, "Ooh, she's not mad yet. I can wait till this guy on my video game dies." And that's why he might forget the third time. And when I walk in there the third time and say, "Hey, take out the trash," and I don't ask anymore and I'm not sweet about it anymore, he knows, uh-oh, I'm out of time. And so while the content is the same and the words are the same, the meaning is really changing every time. Because no moment in your life, no moment in my life is exactly the same as any other moment. And so one of the things that I hope you learn to take advantage of in this class is how to use our moments more wisely. So many of us may have walked away from a conversation or an argument with somebody and thought, "Ooh, I should have said this and I should have said that. Next time I'll tell them." And next time never comes because there's not that perfect moment to say that perfect thing at that perfect time. And so hopefully we learn to take advantage of the moments when they come, realizing that every moment is a new moment, and then we can be more effective communicators. But again, it's not a perfect system. So let's talk about why communication is unrepeatable. So the next slide is not one of your principles. That's why it won't have a number on it. Instead, since I know you're taking notes, put this off to the side. We're going to talk about the definition of communication, which will help us to understand this principle and others that are coming. So why is communication unrepeatable? Well, it's rooted in the definition. Communication is the co-creation of meaning between people through the use of symbols. Now, if I had you all go Google communication definition, probably 50 different answers could come up, because lots of people have defined communication: sociologists, anthropologists, biologists, communication scholars. There are a lot of different versions of a definition floating around. I want us all to use the same definition in this class, which is why I'm providing this one for you. We're going to talk about it, and you need to memorize it. So rarely will I ask you to memorize things. Instead, I want you to learn things. I want you to make them a part of you, which is different than memorizing. But in this case, I really want you to know this definition word for word, so you'll see it on your exams, word for word, this definition, because it's setting the tone for the rest of the class. So let's talk about the definition. Communication is the co-creation. So what does co-create mean? Co-create means to do something together with another person. So for real communication to occur, there have to be at least two people involved. So when you talk to yourself, that does not qualify as true communication. And we all talk to ourselves. Some of us do it out loud, some of us do it in our head, but we all have that kind of dialogue going on anytime in our mind with ourselves. So, but that doesn't qualify as true communication. For true communication to occur, there have to be at least two people. There can be more, but there have to be at least two people involved. So communication is the co-creation of meaning. So meaning's a little hard to define. Think of meaning as understanding. It's the sense we make of things as we interact with others and as we walk away from others. So it's the understanding we have about ourselves, it's the understanding we have about them, it's the understanding we have about a topic or the world around us. It's the sense, it's the leftover, what all of this interaction really leaves us with. So communication is the co-creation of meaning between people through the use of symbols. And we've already talked about symbols, so you know they're one thing that represents another thing. And our symbols can be verbal or nonverbal. So verbal symbols are words. Verbal means using words. And nonverbal symbols are not using words. Nonverbal means not using words. All right, so now that we understand the definition of communication a little bit better, we're going to jump back into those principles and truths. The next principle, number 4, is that the skill of effective communication is not a natural human ability. It is learned. So we are not born knowing how to communicate effectively. Now, some have argued, well, when we're born, we cry, and crying's communication. And there's truth to that, because it's unintentional, but one person is getting meaning from those cries. But to the best of our knowledge, an infant is not trying to communicate when they're born. An infant is having an instinctive response to its environment. So it comes from a place that's warm and dark and moist and it felt safe into a place that's cold and bright and people are poking at it and it's scared. And so, as many of us do when we're scared, it screams, ah! And over time, what happens for most infants is that when it screams, somebody puts a bottle or a breast in its mouth and makes that icky feeling in its stomach go away. Or when it screams, somebody picks it up and makes it feel safe or warm. Or when it screams, somebody gets that wet, sticky feeling off its butt and makes it feel dry and comfortable again. And what starts to happen for most infants is they start to connect, oh, when I do this, I get this kind of a response. That's the point at which they're starting to learn communication. And the reason I say for most infants is because there are stories in human history of infants who did not receive that kind of response to their cries, who did not learn to communicate. And they did not develop the same communication skills the rest of us have for the most part. So the fact that communication is a learned skill rather than something we're born with is both bad news and good news. The bad news is sometimes the people we learn to communicate from are terrible communicators, which means we are learning bad habits. The good news is that whether we're 15 or we're 85 years old, we can improve our communication. If we desire to be a better communicator and we work hard at it, we can make ourselves better. Now, it is true if you're 15, you may have fewer years of bad habits. Compared to if you're 85, you may have more years of bad habits, which means it may be easier to change at 15 than it is at 85. But that doesn't mean it can't happen at 85. It just means it may take a little longer and it's going to be a little bit harder. So each of us can continue to grow in communication throughout our lifetime as long as we're devoted to doing so and as long as we try. And of course our goal is to get better and better, but it's still not a perfect system.